Wait, she's not dead. Homeless woman interrupts billionaire's funeral. The crowd fell silent as the woman in rags stumbled through the church doors. Mud on her shoes, fire in her eyes. "Stop the funeral," she shouted. "He's not dead, and I can prove it." Mourners were left in shock when a homeless woman said that, "Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comments section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The morning of Victoria Ashford's funeral arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed almost offensive in its beauty. September sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, painting the assembled mourners in fragments of amber, crimson, and sapphire. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual indifference to individual tragedy. But inside these hallowed walls, the city's elite had gathered to bid farewell to one of their own, Victoria Ashford. The name alone carried weight: 3 decades of ruthless business acumen, philanthropic gestures calculated to the last tax-deductible dollar, and a personal fortune estimated at $7 billion. She had built Ashford Global from the ground up, transforming a modest real estate portfolio into an empire that spanned luxury hotels, commercial properties, and tech investments across 4 continents. At 63, she had supposedly succumbed to a sudden heart attack in her Fifth Avenue penthouse, dying alone despite being surrounded by luxury that most people couldn't fathom. The mahogany casket, adorned with a blanket of white orchids that cost more than a luxury sedan, rested before the altar. Closed, of course. The family had insisted. Too traumatic, they'd whispered. Too sudden. Let us remember her as she was powerful, poised, untouchable. Marcus Ashford sat in the front pew. His 6'3" frame somehow diminished despite his impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit. At 40, he was the picture of the dutiful son, though anyone who looked closely might have noticed the tightness around his mouth, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched like a beating heart. His wife, Celeste, sat beside him in head-to-toe Chanel morning attire, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, her face a perfect mask of grief that didn't quite reach her cold blue eyes. On Marcus's other side, his sister Diane dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. At 38, she had inherited their mother's sharp cheekbones and sharper business sense, though she'd always lived in Victoria's considerable shadow. Her husband, Jonathan, a hedge fund manager whose main accomplishment was marrying into the Ashford fortune, stared vacantly at the casket, probably calculating his wife's inheritance. Behind them, the pews filled with Manhattan's power players, CEOs, politicians, socialites, and the merely wealthy trying to rub shoulders with the truly rich. They whispered among themselves, trading stories of Victoria's legendary board meetings, her famous charity galas, her reputation for crushing competitors without mercy. To them, she was an icon, a titan, a force of nature finally stilled. Only a handful knew the truth behind the perfectly curated public image. Father Benedict Morrison took his place at the pulpit, his silver hair gleaming in the colored light. He'd been the Ashford family priest for 30 years, had baptized both Marcus and Diane, had blessed 3 of Victoria's 4 marriages. He cleared his throat, and the murmuring ceased. "We gather today," he began, his voice sonorous and practiced, "to celebrate the life of Victoria Eleanor Ashford, a woman whose impact on this city, indeed on this world, cannot be overstated. She was a visionary, a philanthropist, a mother, and a friend to many here today." As Father Morrison droned on, reciting the carefully crafted eulogy that Victoria's publicist had probably drafted years ago, Marcus felt something twist in his gut. Guilt? Grief? Relief? He couldn't tell anymore. The past week had been a blur of funeral arrangements, press statements, emergency board meetings, and lawyers. So many lawyers. Victoria's will was to be read immediately after the service, and Marcus knew what it would say. He'd seen the documents 3 months ago when she'd called him into her office, her face grave, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I'm dying, Marcus," she'd said. No preamble, no emotion. Just a fact delivered like quarterly earnings. 6 months, maybe less. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I've decided not to pursue treatment. He'd stood there, frozen, unable to process. His mother, his formidable, seemingly immortal mother, was dying. "I'm telling you first because you'll need to prepare. The company, the estate, everything will be yours to manage. Diane gets her share, of course, but you're my successor. You always have been." She'd paused, studying him with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. "I know we've had our difficulties, Marcus. I know I wasn't the warm, nurturing mother you might have wanted. But everything I built, everything I did, was for you and your sister. I hope, in time, you'll understand that." But she hadn't died from cancer. She died from a heart attack 2 months later, suddenly, unexpectedly, alone in her bedroom. Or that's what the official report said. What the newspapers printed. What everyone believed. Everyone except Marcus. Victoria Ashford gave generously to countless causes. Father Morrison continued. The Ashford Foundation has endowed scholarships, funded medical research, built community centers in underserved neighborhoods. Her legacy of compassion will endure for generations. Marcus almost laughed. Compassion. His mother had been many things, but compassionate. Behind them, the pews filled with Manhattan's power players. CEOs, politicians, socialites, and the merely wealthy trying to rub shoulders with the truly rich. They whispered among themselves, trading stories of Victoria's legendary board meetings, her famous charity galas, her reputation for crushing competitors without mercy. To them, she was an icon, a titan, a force of nature finally stilled. Only a handful knew the truth behind the perfectly curated public image. Father Benedict Morrison took his place at the pulpit, his silver hair gleaming in the colored light. He'd been the Ashford family priest for 30 years, had baptized both Marcus and Diane, had blessed 3 of Victoria's 4 marriages. He cleared his throat, and the murmuring ceased. "We gather today," he began, his voice sonorous and practiced, "to celebrate the life of Victoria Eleanor Ashford, a woman whose impact on this city, indeed on this world, cannot be overstated. She was a visionary, a philanthropist, a mother, and a friend to many here today." As Father Morrison droned on, reciting the carefully crafted eulogy that Victoria's publicist had probably drafted years ago, Marcus felt something twist in his gut. Guilt? Grief? Relief? He couldn't tell anymore. The past week had been a blur of funeral arrangements, press statements, emergency board meetings, and lawyers. So many lawyers. Victoria's will was to be read immediately after the service, and Marcus knew what it would say. He'd seen the documents 3 months ago when she'd called him into her office, her face grave, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I'm dying, Marcus," she'd said. No preamble, no emotion. Just a fact delivered like quarterly earnings. 6 months, maybe less. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I've decided not to pursue treatment. He'd stood there, frozen, unable to process. His mother, his formidable, seemingly immortal mother, was dying. "I'm telling you first because you'll need to prepare. The company, the estate, everything will be yours to manage. Diane gets her share, of course, but you're my successor. You always have been." She'd paused, studying him with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. "I know we've had our difficulties, Marcus. I know I wasn't the warm, nurturing mother you might have wanted. But everything I built, everything I did, was for you and your sister. I hope, in time, you'll understand that." But she hadn't died from cancer. She died from a heart attack 2 months later, suddenly, unexpectedly, alone in her bedroom. Or that's what the official report said. What the newspapers printed. What everyone believed. Everyone except Marcus. Victoria Ashford gave generously to countless causes. Father Morrison continued. The Ashford Foundation has endowed scholarships, funded medical research, built community centers in underserved neighborhoods. Her legacy of compassion will endure for generations. Marcus almost laughed. Compassion. His mother had been many things, but compassionate wasn't one of them. Every charitable donation had been a chess move, every philanthropic gesture a calculated investment in social capital. She taught him that early on. Generosity is just good business, Marcus. The right donation opens more doors than any amount of networking. A movement in the back of the cathedral caught his attention. Someone had entered, late, inappropriately dressed, causing a stir among the ushers. Marcus craned his neck slightly, curious despite himself. A woman stood at the entrance, backlit by the brilliant morning sun that poured through the open doors. She was painfully thin, wearing layers of mismatched clothing that hung on her frame. A torn winter coat despite the mild September weather, a faded dress underneath, scuffed boots held together with duct tape. Her gray-streaked brown hair hung in tangled mats around a face weathered beyond its years. She carried a garbage bag over one shoulder, everything she owned, probably a homeless woman. In St. Catherine's Cathedral, during Victoria Ashford's funeral, the ushers moved toward her, clearly intending to escort her out as gently but firmly as possible, but she pushed past them with surprising strength. She lurched down the center aisle, her boots echoing on the marble floor, her breathing ragged and loud in the hushed space. Father Morrison stopped mid-sentence, his carefully prepared words dying on his lips. The congregation turned as one, a collective gasp rippling through the pews. Marcus half rose from his seat, uncertain, his heart suddenly pounding. The woman reached the casket, bracing herself against it with both hands. Up close, Marcus could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 50, though life on the streets had aged her prematurely. Her hands, trembling against the polished wood, bore scars and dirt-caked fingernails. But her eyes, when she lifted them to scan the crowd, burned with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. "Stop," she said, her voice cracked and hoarse but commanding nonetheless. "Stop this farce. Stop these lies." Security guards were moving down the aisles now, but Marcus held up a hand, some instinct he couldn't name making him want to hear what this woman had to say. "Ma'am," Father Morrison said gently, descending from the pulpit, "this is a private service. I understand you may be in distress, but she's not dead," the woman shouted, and the words echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a thunderclap. "Victoria Ashford is not dead. This is all a lie." The congregation erupted in shocked whispers. Celeste gripped Marcus's arm, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Diane let out a small, strangled sound. But Marcus couldn't look away from the homeless woman, from the absolute certainty in her wild eyes. "I saw her," the woman continued, swaying slightly as if the effort of speaking was draining what little strength she had. "3 days ago, at the shelter on Houston Street. She was alive. She was breathing. She was—" Her voice broke, and tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. She was crying like her heart was broken, like the world had ended. "But she was alive. That's impossible," Marcus heard himself say, his voice sounding distant, not quite his own. "You must be confused. My mother died 8 days ago. She's been at the funeral home since then. You couldn't have seen her." The woman's gaze locked onto his, and something in her expression made his blood run cold. Recognition, pity, and something else, something that looked almost like guilt. "I know what I saw," she whispered. "I know who I saw, and I know." She reached into her garbage bag with shaking hands, pulling out something that caught the light. A bracelet, platinum, encrusted with diamonds, unmistakable. Victoria's bracelet, the one she'd worn every day for the past 15 years. The one Marcus's father had given her for their 20th anniversary before the divorce. "How did you?" Diane's voice cut through the shocked silence, high and sharp. "That's my mother's bracelet. How did you get that?" "She gave it to me," the woman said simply. After she told me everything. After she made me promise to come here today, to interrupt this funeral, to make sure you all knew. She said you deserved to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Marcus felt the world tilting, the cathedral suddenly too bright, too hot, too real. This couldn't be happening. His mother was dead. He'd seen the death certificate, signed by Dr. Harrison Chun, the family physician. He'd watched them close the casket. He'd open it, the homeless woman said, pointing at the casket with a trembling finger. Open it and you'll see. She's not in there. She was never in there. This is absurd. Celeste hissed, standing up, her composure cracking. Marcus, do something. Have her removed. This is disrespectful, it's... But Marcus was already moving toward the casket, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. His hands found the latches, his fingers fumbling with the mechanisms. Beside him, Father Morrison was saying something about sanctity and respect, but the words washed over him like water. The latches clicked open, Marcus lifted the lid, and the world as he knew it ended. The casket was empty except for pillows arranged to approximate a body's shape, covered with a silk shroud. No Victoria, no body at all. Just an elaborate deception. A stage prop in a play he hadn't known he was performing in. Behind him, someone screamed. Diane, probably. The cathedral erupted in chaos. People standing, shouting, pushing toward the altar to see for themselves. Security guards spoke urgently into their radios. Camera phones appeared, because even in crisis, even in the presence of the impossible, people documented everything. Marcus stood frozen, staring into the empty casket, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. His mother wasn't dead. His mother had faked her own death. And somehow, this homeless woman was the key to understanding why he turned to her. Questions forming on his lips, but she was already backing away, her mission apparently complete. The security guards had their hands on her now, gently but firmly escorting her toward the side exit. Wait, Marcus called out, pushing through the crowd. Wait, what else did she tell you? Where is she? Why would she do this? The woman paused, looking back at him with those haunting eyes. She said to tell you she's sorry. She said she had no choice. And she said... The woman's voice dropped so low Marcus had to strain to hear it over the chaos. She said the real funeral is coming, and when it does, you'll wish she'd really died today. Then she was gone, pulled through the doors by security, swallowed by the bright September morning, leaving behind nothing but questions and a platinum bracelet that Marcus's sister was now clutching like a lifeline. Her perfect makeup smeared by genuine tears for the first time Marcus could remember. He stood there in the center aisle, the empty casket behind him, his mother's mourners dissolving into a shouting, confused mob around him, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd been told, everything he'd carefully constructed over the past week. All of it was a lie. Victoria Ashford wasn't dead, which meant someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make the world believe she was, which meant his mother. His calculating, brilliant, ruthless mother was playing a game so complex, so dangerous, that she'd been willing to orchestrate her own funeral to execute it. And Marcus, standing in the ruins of the morning's careful ceremony, had the sickening realization that he was a piece on her chessboard, moved without his knowledge, playing a role he'd never auditioned for. The question now was, what game was she playing, and how did it end? The Ashford Global Headquarters occupied 47 floors of a gleaming tower in Midtown Manhattan, a monument to Victoria's vision and ambition. Marcus's office, on the 45th floor, offered a panoramic view of the city his mother had conquered. But today he couldn't bring himself to look at it. Instead, he paced the length of his Persian rug, his phone pressed to his ear, listening to his lawyer explain why they couldn't possibly go to the police. Marcus, listen to me carefully, Gerald Holbrook said, his voice carrying the patient condescension of a man who'd spent 40 years explaining complex legal matters to the wealthy and privileged. If you report that your mother faked her death, you open yourself and the entire Ashford estate to criminal investigation. Fraud, insurance fraud if she had any policies, potential securities fraud given the market impact of her death announcement. The SEC would be all over this. The FBI, the IRS, everyone. But she's alive, Gerald. My mother is alive somewhere, and I don't know why, and I don't know if she's in danger, and… Is she? Gerald interrupted. In danger, I mean, think about it. A woman as intelligent and resourceful as Victoria Ashford doesn't fake her own death unless she's planned it meticulously. She has resources you and I can only imagine. If she wanted to disappear, she'd disappear. The question isn't whether she's safe. I'd bet my retirement she's perfectly safe. The question is why she did it, and what she expects you to do now. Marcus stopped pacing, staring at the framed photograph on his desk. Victoria at the opening of the Shanghai Ashford Grand Hotel. Her expression triumphant, her posture radiating power. That was the mother he knew. Not the crying woman the homeless woman had described. Not someone who would abandon everything she'd built. The will reading, Marcus said suddenly. It's scheduled for this afternoon. What happens now? Gerald sighed. Legally, nothing changes. A death certificate was filed, signed by a licensed physician. Until someone officially challenges that, and I strongly advise against it, the will proceeds as planned. You and Diane will inherit according to the terms Victoria established. Established based on a lie. Established based on documents that are, as far as the state of New York is concerned, completely legitimate. Marcus, I know this is difficult, but you need to make a choice. Either you accept the situation as it stands and move forward with the inheritance, or you open Pandora's box and risk destroying everything your mother built. There's no middle ground here. After he hung up, Marcus stood at the window, finally allowing himself to look out at the city. Somewhere down there, in the canyons of steel and glass, his mother was alive. Hiding. Watching, perhaps. But why? A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. Diane entered without waiting for permission, her earlier composure completely restored. She changed from her funeral attire into a business suit. Armani, navy blue, severe. Her war uniform, Marcus thought. She'd always been more like their mother than he was. More comfortable with the ruthless calculus of business. More willing to make the hard choices. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. Before the will reading, about mother being alive, about the fact that she orchestrated an elaborate fraud that we all participated in unknowingly. Diane's expression didn't flicker. About what we do next. She crossed to his desk, setting down a manila folder. I made some calls after the funeral. Quiet inquiries, people who owe me favors. Dr. Chun, who signed the death certificate. He retired suddenly 2 weeks ago, moved to the Cayman Islands. The funeral home director who prepared mother's body? He received a wire transfer for $500,000 3 days before her supposed death. The lawyer who drafted her last will and testament? Not Gerald. Someone in California we've never used before, who also retired immediately afterward. Marcus flipped through the documents she'd brought. Bank records, property transfers, flight manifests. Evidence of a conspiracy. Evidence of planning. Evidence that Victoria had been orchestrating this for months. Maybe longer. She paid them all off, he said slowly. Created an entire network of people willing to lie about her death. Not just willing. Complicit. Criminally complicit. Which means if we expose this, they all go down. And Gerald's right, so do we. Mother made sure we're tied to this whether we like it or not. Marcus looked up sharply. You knew. Before today. You knew she wasn't really dead. Diane met his gaze steadily. I suspected. Some of the arrangements didn't make sense. The closed casket especially. Mother had a vanity that would never have allowed that. And certain financial transfers in the weeks before her death. Money being moved into offshore accounts. Assets being quietly liquidated. I didn't know for certain, but I suspected. And you said nothing. What should I have said, Marcus? Mother might be faking her own death for reasons I can't fathom? You would have thought I was insane, or paranoid, or making a power play to undermine her while she was supposedly dying. Diane leaned against his desk, her mask slipping just slightly, revealing the exhaustion beneath. I said nothing because I wanted to see how it played out, because I trusted that mother, whatever she was doing, had a reason. What possible reason justifies this? That's what we need to find out. Diane opened her phone, pulling up a photograph. This is the homeless woman from the funeral. Her name is Sarah Hartley, 49 years old, former schoolteacher, lost her job and her apartment after a battle with opioid addiction following a car accident 8 years ago. She's been on the streets for 6 years. How did you? Mother's private investigator. The same one she used for due diligence on business acquisitions. I've had him on retainer for the past 3 months, keeping tabs on anything unusual. He identified Sarah within 2 hours of the funeral ending. Diane pulled up another photo, Sarah and Victoria, sitting together on a bench outside a homeless shelter, talking. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. This was taken 4 days ago, Diane said. They met 3 times over the past week. Long conversations. Mother even brought her food, coffee. She was preparing Sarah, coaching her for her role at the funeral. Her role, Marcus repeated bitterly. We're all just playing roles in Mother's grand production. Yes. And now we need to figure out what the production is and how it ends. Diane's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at Marcus. The will reading is starting in 20 minutes. Are you coming? Do I have a choice? We always have choices, Marcus. Mother taught us that. We just have to be willing to live with the consequences. The conference room on the 46th floor was already full when Marcus and Diane arrived. Victoria's attorney, a man named Edmund Voss who Marcus had met exactly once before, sat at the head of the table with an old-fashioned leather document folder. Around the table sat the key players in Victoria's empire, board members, executives, the CFO, the COO, people who would be affected by whatever Victoria's will contained. But there were also others, people Marcus didn't recognize. A middle-aged woman in a wheelchair, accompanied by a younger man who kept a protective hand on her shoulder. An elderly black man in a worn but clean suit. A teenage girl with her mother, both looking uncomfortable in the corporate setting. Strangers, outsiders. Why would they be at Victoria Ashford's will reading? Thank you all for coming, Edmund Voss said, his voice dry and precise. This is indeed an unusual situation, and I thank you for your patience. The reading of Victoria Ashford's last will and testament will proceed as scheduled, despite this morning's disruption. Marcus caught Diane's eye across the table. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. They'd agreed on the car ride over. Stay silent, observe, learn, react to nothing, give nothing away. Mrs. Ashford came to me 6 months ago with very specific instructions. Voss continued. She was quite clear that this will was to be read exactly as written, with no deviations, regardless of circumstances. I understand that may seem strange now, but I am bound by my professional obligations to honor her wishes. He opened the leather folder, removing a stack of papers. Before we begin with the distribution of assets, Mrs. Ashford requested that I play a video message she recorded. She was quite insistent that this message be seen before anything else is read. A screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed, and then, impossibly, Victoria Ashford appeared. She sat in what Marcus recognized as her home office, the one in the penthouse he'd supposedly found her dead in. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry except her wedding bracelet, the one now in evidence lockup after Sarah Hartley's dramatic appearance. Her hair was styled immaculately, her makeup perfect. She looked healthy, vital, powerful. Nothing like someone weeks away from death. If you're watching this, Victoria's recorded voice said, then the theatrical production I orchestrated has concluded, and you all know I'm not actually dead. I apologize for the deception, particularly to my children, Marcus and Diane. I know this has been difficult for you, but I want you to understand that everything I've done has been necessary. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists under the table. Necessary. That was always Victoria's justification for her manipulations. Necessary for the company. Necessary for the family. Necessary for some grand design only she could see. 30 years ago, Victoria continued, I made choices that I believed were right at the time. I built an empire, yes, but I also destroyed lives in the process. I was ruthless. I was cruel. I justified it all as business, as strategy, as necessary for success. But the truth is, I was running from something, from someone. And I let that fear drive me to become a person I'm no longer proud of. The camera angle was tight on Victoria's face, and Marcus could see something in her expression he'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. 25 years ago, I ruined a man named Thomas Hartley. He was a competitor, a small-time developer trying to make his mark. He had a project that would have competed with one of my developments, and I couldn't allow that. So I destroyed him. I bought out his investors, I spread rumors about his financial instability, I used my connections to block his permits. Within 6 months, he was bankrupt. Within a year, he was dead, suicide, though I didn't learn that until much later. The woman in the wheelchair at the conference table made a small sound. The young man with her squeezed her shoulder. Thomas left behind a wife, Catherine, and a daughter, Sarah. I took everything from them. Catherine was paralyzed in a car accident shortly after Thomas's death. An accident that happened because she was working 3 jobs to keep their home. So exhausted she fell asleep at the wheel. Sarah was 17. She ended up in foster care, eventually becoming a teacher, until her own car accident led to an addiction that destroyed her career and left her homeless. The pieces were falling into place. Sarah Hartley, the homeless woman at the funeral. Victoria's victim, or the victim's daughter. But why bring her into this elaborate charade? I tracked them down 3 years ago, Victoria said. I wanted to see what had become of the collateral damage from my ambition. What I found horrified me. Catherine in a group home, barely able to afford care. Sarah on the streets, broken by a system that fails the vulnerable. And I realized that for all my wealth, all my power, all my supposed success, I had created nothing but suffering. Victoria paused, seeming to gather herself. This will is my attempt at redemption. Not because I expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but because I can at least try to repair some of the damage I've caused. The screen went black for a moment, then Victoria reappeared, this time at her desk, papers spread before her. The distribution of my estate is as follows. To my son, Marcus, I leave controlling interest in Ashford Global, 60% of shares, along with my property holdings in Manhattan, including the Fifth Avenue penthouse. But this inheritance comes with a condition. Marcus felt his heart sink. There was always a condition with Victoria. Marcus, you must personally oversee the establishment and funding of the Hartley Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing housing, job training, and addiction support services for homeless individuals in New York City. You will endow this foundation with $300 million from my estate, and you will serve on its board for a minimum of 5 years. You will also personally work with Sarah Hartley to ensure the foundation addresses the real needs of the community it serves. If you refuse these conditions, your inheritance passes to your sister with the same requirements. The screen showed Marcus's face. Shock, anger, confusion, all trying to coexist in the same moment. To my daughter, Diane, I leave 35% of shares in Ashford Global, my international property holdings, and a trust fund of $500 million. Like your brother, you have conditions. You will personally oversee the creation of the Catherine Hartley Care Fund, which will provide free or low-cost assisted living and medical care for disabled individuals who cannot afford quality care. You will endow this fund with $200 million and serve on its board for a minimum of 5 years. Diane's expression was unreadable, but Marcus saw her jaw tighten. The remaining 5% of Ashford Global shares will be divided equally between Catherine and Sarah Hartley, giving them a voice in the company's direction. Additionally, Catherine will receive an immediate payment of $10 million for her care and quality of life. Sarah will receive $5 million, held in trust and distributed over 10 years, with conditions requiring her participation in the foundation's work and ongoing treatment for her addiction. The elderly black man at the table. Marcus suddenly recognized him from the photographs in Victoria's office. Samuel Richardson, her first employee, the man who'd helped her get her real estate license 40 years ago. To Samuel Richardson, Victoria's voice continued, "I leave the Greenwich Village properties we acquired together in 1985, now worth approximately $50 million. Sam, you believed in me when no one else did. This is long overdue." The teenage girl and her mother were next. To Rosa Martinez and her daughter Isabella. "Rosa, you cleaned my office for 15 years and never once failed to ask about my day, to show me kindness I didn't deserve. Your daughter wants to go to medical school. I'm establishing a scholarship in Isabella's name that will cover her education completely, along with an endowment to fund medical education for other children of service workers. Rosa, you'll also receive $5 million, free and clear." Ending of his mother, revealing dimensions to her character he'd never imagined existed. Finally, Victoria's image centered on the screen again, her expression grave. "Marcus and Diane, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I've manipulated you, lied to you, used you as pawns in this elaborate scheme. But I needed you to understand something that I couldn't teach you any other way." She leaned forward, her gray eyes seeming to look directly at them through the screen. "I built an empire, but I did it by crushing anyone who stood in my way. I accumulated wealth beyond measure, but I did it by ignoring the human cost. I became one of the most powerful women in New York, but I did it by forgetting that power without compassion is just tyranny. And in the end, all that wealth and power couldn't give me the one thing I wanted most: your respect, your genuine love, your belief that I was a good person." A single tear rolled down Victoria's cheek, and Marcus felt his throat tighten despite his anger. "I'm not dead, but I'm leaving. I'm disappearing from your lives, from this company, from this city. By the time you watch this, I'll be somewhere you can't find me. I've taken only what I need to live comfortably but simply. The rest is yours with the conditions I've outlined. Not to control you, though I know that's what you'll think at first, but to give you the chance to be better than I was. To use this empire for something more than accumulation. To see the Sarah Hartleys of the world as human beings, not obstacles or collateral damage." The screen went black, then Victoria appeared one final time, this time in what looked like casual clothes, standing in front of a nondescript background. "If you're wondering why I faked my death instead of just disappearing, it's because I needed you to feel it. To feel the loss, the grief, the weight of my absence. I needed you to stand at that empty casket and face the reality that someday, I really will be gone, and you'll have to reckon with my legacy. I needed you to see that homeless woman, Sarah, and recognize that she is the real cost of my ambition. And I needed the world to see it too. By tomorrow, every news outlet will be covering this story. The billionaire who faked her own death to expose her crimes and make amends. It will be a scandal. It will hurt the company. But it will also, I hope, start a conversation about how we treat the vulnerable, about corporate responsibility, about the real measure of success." Victoria smiled then, a sad, weary expression. "I love you both. I know I didn't show it in the ways you needed. I know I was a terrible mother in many respects. But everything I built for you. And now I'm giving you the chance to build something better. Something that matters. Something that helps instead of harms." She raised her hand in a gesture that was almost a wave. "Goodbye, my darlings. Make me proud. Not by being powerful or wealthy, but by being good. By being the kind of people this broken world needs." The screen went dark. The lights came up, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then Catherine Hartley, Thomas's widow, Sarah's mother, broke the silence. Her voice was weak but clear. She came to see me 3 times over the past year. She sat by my bed and told me everything. What she'd done to Thomas. How she'd destroyed our lives. She cried. She begged for forgiveness. Catherine looked directly at Marcus. I didn't forgive her. I told her that what she did was unforgivable. But I also told her that maybe she could make it right. Not for me, it's too late for me. But for Sarah. For others like Sarah. And she listened. Edmund Voss cleared his throat. The terms of the will are binding. If you accept the inheritance, you accept the conditions. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, if you decline, the assets pass to the charitable foundations to be established anyway, managed by independent trustees. Either way, Victoria's vision moves forward. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the windows, staring out at the city his mother had conquered and was now abandoning. Behind him, he could hear Diane asking questions about the foundations, about the logistics, already shifting into problem-solving mode. That was her gift, the ability to process the emotional and immediately focus on the practical. But Marcus couldn't think practically. He could only think about his mother, somewhere out there watching this unfold, congratulating herself, probably, on another masterful manipulation. Except this time, the manipulation was designed to make them better people, to force them to confront the cost of their privilege, to turn the Ashford Empire into something more than a monument to one woman's ruthless ambition. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry I lied to you, but I'm not sorry for what I did. You'll understand someday. You're stronger than you think, Marcus. Strong enough to be the man I never let you become. I love you. Mother, he stared at the message until his vision blurred. Then he turned back to the conference room, to Diane already taking charge, to the people whose lives his mother had destroyed and was now trying to repair, to the lawyer patiently explaining trust structures and foundation bylaws. I'll do it, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the conversations. Everyone turned to look at him. I'll accept the inheritance and the conditions. I'll build the foundation. I'll work with Sarah. I'll do whatever Mother wanted. Diane studied him for a moment, then nodded. So will I. But, Marcus continued, his voice hardening, I'm also going to find her. Wherever she is, whatever new life she's building, I'm going to find her. Because we're going to have a conversation, Mother and I. A real one. Without the games and the manipulations and the strategic moves. And she's going to tell me the whole truth. Not just the carefully curated version she left in that video. Edmund Voss shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Ashford, I should tell you that your mother was very clear about not wanting to be found. I don't care what she wants, Marcus interrupted. For 30 years, I've played by her rules, lived up to her expectations, been the dutiful son. But this, he gestured at the dark screen where Victoria's image had been. This is too far. You don't get to fake your own death, rearrange everyone's lives, and then disappear without accountability. I'll honor her wishes. I'll build her foundations. I'll do the work she's demanding. But I'll do it on my terms, not hers. And part of those terms is finding out why she really did this. Because Marcus didn't believe the redemption story. It was too neat, too theatrical, too perfectly crafted. Victoria Ashford didn't do anything without multiple layers of motivation. And somewhere, buried beneath the public contrition, and 6 months had passed since Victoria Ashford's empty casket had been opened in St. Catherine's Cathedral, and Marcus had learned more about his mother in that time than he had in 30 years of living under her roof. The Hartley Foundation had opened its doors in 3 locations across New York City, providing housing for 200 formerly homeless individuals, with job training programs that boasted an 82% placement rate. Sarah Hartley, now 6 months sober and serving as the Foundation's community outreach director, had become something Marcus never expected: a friend. Her insights into the failures of the system, combined with his resources and business acumen, had created something genuinely transformative. Diane's Catherine Hartley Care Fund had revolutionized assisted living for disabled individuals who'd been warehoused in understaffed facilities. Catherine herself had moved into a beautiful apartment with round-the-clock care, and Marcus had watched his sister visit her weekly, the two women forming an unlikely bond over their shared experience of being shaped by Victoria's choices. The media firestorm had been as spectacular as Victoria had predicted. Billionaire fakes death to expose her own crimes had dominated headlines for weeks. The SEC had investigated, the FBI had asked questions, but ultimately, no charges had been filed. Victoria had paid off her conspirators with clean money, had committed no fraud that could be prosecuted, and had left behind a will that distributed her wealth to victims and charities. It was, legally speaking, eccentric but not criminal. But Marcus had kept his promise. He'd hired the best private investigators money could buy, not his mother's people, but independent professionals with no loyalty to the Ashford name. And slowly, methodically, he'd followed the thread of her disappearance. The trail led him to a small coastal town in Maine, to a modest cottage overlooking the Atlantic, to a woman who called herself Victoria Hayes and worked part-time at the local library. He stood outside the cottage on a gray November afternoon, watching smoke curl from the chimney, gathering the courage to knock on a door he'd tracked across 6 months and 3,000 miles of false leads. She answered on the second knock, unsurprised. Of course she wasn't surprised. Victoria Ashford was always 3 moves ahead. Yes, and I made a different choice for both of us. I chose to give you a gift instead of a burden. I chose to force you to confront what my legacy really meant before I was gone. I chose to make you see Sarah Hartley not as a homeless woman, but as a human being whose life I destroyed. Because that's what I did, Marcus. For 30 years, I destroyed people to build an empire, and I told myself it was for you and Diane. But it wasn't. It was for me. For my ego, my ambition. My need to prove I was stronger than everyone who doubted me. She stood, moving to the window, looking out at the gray Atlantic. I grew up poor. Did you know that? My father was a drunk. My mother cleaned houses. I was the smart girl who wasn't supposed to amount to anything. So I clawed my way up, and with every rung of the ladder, I kicked someone else down. I justified it as survival, as necessity. But at some point, survival became cruelty, and I was too blinded by success to notice. Marcus joined her at the window. Thomas Hartley wasn't your only victim. No, he was one of dozens. Some survived, rebuilt their lives. Others didn't. I tracked them all down, Marcus. Every person I destroyed, every family I shattered. The will reading you attended? That was just the public face. Privately, I've spent the past 3 years making restitution where I could. Anonymous donations, paid off mortgages, scholarship funds. Trying to balance scales that can never really be balanced. And the theatrical death? The empty casket? That was just... What? Your grand exit. Victoria turned to face him, and now he saw tears in her eyes. Real, unguarded tears. That was me trying to teach you the most important lesson I never learned until it was too late. That wealth and power mean nothing if you use them to harm instead of heal. That success measured in dollars is hollow if it's built on broken lives. That being remembered as powerful is worthless compared to being remembered as good. She reached up, touching his face with a trembling hand. I wanted you to feel my death before it happened. To grieve, to rage, to question everything. And then I wanted you to discover I was alive and realize that you'd been given a second chance. Not to have me back, but to do better than I did. To take the empire I built and transform it into something worthy. Something that helps instead of harms. Marcus caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. You manipulative, brilliant, infuriating woman. You couldn't just tell me this? You had to orchestrate an entire fake death. Would you have listened if I had? She smiled through her tears. You're my son, Marcus. You have my stubbornness. You needed to discover the truth yourself. Needed to walk the path I set out. Needed to meet Sarah and Catherine and see the real cost of unchecked ambition. Words wouldn't have been enough. You needed to live it. They stood there as the afternoon light faded, mother and son, connected by blood and hurt and a complicated love that had never known how to express itself simply. How long do you really have? Marcus asked finally. 3 months, maybe 4. The pain is manageable now, but it's getting worse. I have hospice care arranged for when it becomes necessary. I'm staying. The words came out before Marcus fully thought them through, but once said, he knew they were right. I'm staying here with you until the end. No arguments, no negotiations. You gave up your right to push me away when you faked your death and turned my life upside down. Marcus. No. You've had your say, mother. You've orchestrated your grand exit, taught your lessons, made your redemption play. Now I get my turn. And I'm choosing to spend these last months with you. Really with you? Not as your heir or your student or your business successor. Just as your son. Victoria broke then, truly broke, in a way Marcus had never seen. She collapsed against him, sobbing, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. He held her, this woman who'd seemed invincible his entire life, and felt her frailty, her humanity, her fear of the death she tried to control through an elaborate charade. I'm scared, she whispered. I've faced boardrooms full of hostile investors. I've made billion-dollar gambles. I've stared down competitors who wanted to destroy me. But I'm terrified of dying, of the pain, of the loss of control, of being forgotten or remembered only as a monster. Then let me help you, Marcus said. Let me be here. Let me show you that you're not a monster, just a complicated woman who made terrible choices and is trying, finally, to make better ones. Let me give you what you never let yourself have. Someone who loves you despite everything, who sees both the ruthlessness and the remorse, who knows you're human. She pulled back, searching his face. You don't hate me? After everything? I should. Part of me wants to. But no, I don't hate you. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm still processing the insanity of the past 6 months. But I also see what you've done through the foundation, through the care fund, through all the private restitutions. I see you trying to make amends. And I see a mother who loved her children enough to stage an elaborate death rather than burden them with watching her die slowly. It was still manipulation, yes. But for once, it was manipulation aimed at making us better people instead of just more successful ones. I'll take it. They talked through the night, mother and son, finally having the honest conversations they'd never allowed themselves before. Victoria told him stories from her childhood, the poverty and shame that had driven her ambition. Marcus told her about the years of trying to live up to impossible expectations, of feeling like a chess piece instead of a person. They argued, they laughed, they cried. They sat in comfortable silence watching the fire burn down to embers. And when dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the cottage in shades of gold and pink, they made a plan. Not a strategic business plan, not a calculated move, but a simple human agreement. Victoria's remaining months would be spent here, in this cottage, with Marcus taking leave from the company to care for her. Diane would visit when she could. They would call Sarah and Catherine, let them know the truth. And when the end came, Victoria would die not as the legendary billionaire who faked her death, but as a woman surrounded by the family she'd finally learned to let love her. That epilogue. 3 months LTR Victoria Ashford died on a February morning with snow falling softly outside her cottage window and her son holding her hand. Her last words were not about business or legacy or the empire she'd built. They were simpler than that. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for letting me be just your mother at the end. The funeral, the real one this time, was small. Marcus and Diane, their spouses, Sarah and Catherine Hartley, Samuel Richardson, Rosa and Isabella Martinez, and a handful of others Victoria had helped in her final years. No press, no cameras, no spectacle. Just a simple service in the small main church Victoria had attended during her final months, using the name Victoria Hayes, known to the community as the kind woman who worked at the library and always had time to help kids with their homework. They buried her in the town cemetery overlooking the ocean, with a simple stone that read, Victoria Eleanor Ashford Hayes. Mother, friend, redeemed. 1962-2026. Back in New York, the Hartley Foundation continued to grow. Marcus split his time between running Ashford Global and working directly with the homeless population the foundation served. He'd kept his mother's portrait in his office, but he'd added another photo beside it. Victoria in her cottage, laughing at something Marcus had said, looking more at peace than he'd ever seen her in life. Sarah Hartley, now 18 months sober and serving as the foundation's director, spoke at conferences about second chances and the importance of seeing homeless individuals as people, not problems. She'd helped over 1,000 people transition off the streets, each success a small redemption for the loss of her father. Catherine Hartley lived comfortably, her medical needs met, surrounded by care and dignity. She never forgave Victoria. Forgiveness, she maintained, wasn't hers to give for crimes against her late husband. But she acknowledged that Victoria's attempt at restitution had made a real difference, and that counted for something. Diane transformed the Care Fund into a national model, lobbying for policy changes in how disabled individuals receive support. She'd found purpose beyond accumulating wealth, and though she'd never say it aloud, she was grateful to her mother for forcing her to see beyond the boardroom. And Marcus? He kept his promise. He made the empire matter. Every business decision was filtered through a simple question: does this help or does this harm? When the answer was harm, he walked away, no matter how profitable the opportunity. He'd learned his mother's final lesson well: true power isn't the ability to crush others, but the choice to uplift them instead. The media eventually moved on to other scandals, other stories. Victoria's fake death became a footnote in business history, a bizarre tale told at cocktail parties. But for those whose lives she'd touched in her final years, she became something else. Proof that even the most ruthless among us can choose change, can attempt redemption, can die better than we lived. 1 year after Victoria's death, Marcus stood at the opening of the 10th Hartley Foundation location. Sarah stood beside him, addressing the crowd of donors, politicians, and formerly homeless individuals whose lives had been transformed. Victoria Ashford was a complicated woman, Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. She destroyed my father, shattered my family, and set in motion events that left me on the streets for 6 years. I should hate her memory. Part of me always will. But I also recognize that she spent her final years trying to repair the damage she'd caused. She didn't do it perfectly. Redemption is messy, and it doesn't erase the harm. But she tried. And because she tried, because she forced her children to see what their wealth was built on, over 2,000 people have been housed, fed, and given a chance at a new life. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. Victoria taught me that it's never too late to choose better. That we're not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do after we recognize we've been wrong. And that sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is forcing others to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they've helped create. After the ceremony, Marcus walked to the small memorial garden they'd created behind the foundation's headquarters. Among the flowering trees and peaceful benches, there was a plaque. In memory of Thomas Hartley and all those whose lives were casualties of unchecked ambition. May we do better. May we build better. May we be better. And beside it, words Marcus had asked to be added. And in memory of Victoria Ashford, who learned, finally, that the greatest fortune isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away. That the most powerful legacy isn't control, but compassion. That the truest success isn't being remembered as invincible, but as human enough to change. Marcus sat on a bench, feeling the spring sun on his face, and thought about his mother, the ruthless businesswoman who'd destroyed competitors without mercy, the dying woman who'd staged an elaborate death to teach her children empathy, the scared patient who'd clung to his hand at the end and thanked him for seeing her as human. She'd been all of those things. Monster and martyr, tyrant and teacher, mother and manipulator. And in her final act, she'd given him the gift she'd never had herself. The opportunity to build something meaningful while there was still time to enjoy it. His phone buzzed. Diane, texting about a board meeting next week. The business of the empire continuing, but with a different purpose now. Using profits to fund programs, to support communities, to lift up instead of crush. It was what Victoria would have wanted. No. It was better than what Victoria would have wanted. Because Marcus and Diane had taken her dying lesson and expanded it beyond her vision. They'd created something she couldn't have imagined in her ruthless prime. A business empire with a conscience, a fortune used not just for making more fortune, but for repairing the world their mother had damaged. As Marcus stood to leave, he whispered to the empty garden, "We're doing it, Mother. We're building something better. Something that would make you proud, not the old you but the you I knew at the end. The you who finally understood that wealth without purpose is just weight." The wind rustled through the memorial trees, carrying the scent of flowers and possibility. And Marcus walked back into the foundation, into the work of redemption. Not his mother's redemption, which had died with her, but his own. The choice to take the empire built on broken lives and transform it into something that rebuilt them instead. Because in the end, that was Victoria Ashford's true legacy. Not the buildings with her name on them, not the billions in the bank, not the business empire that would outlast her. Her legacy was simpler and more profound. 2 children who learned to use their privilege to heal instead of harm. A homeless woman given dignity and purpose. A paralyzed widow granted comfort and care. Thousands of people given second chances, and a final lesson, carved into the hearts of all who knew her story. It's never too late to choose better. It's never too late to see the humanity in others. It's never too late to attempt redemption. Even if you have to fake your own death to teach it, then please like and comment. God bless you.